Okay, so set the motivation. Okay, so through understanding karma, we understand that each instant there's a karmic imprint, a mental imprint deposited in our consciousness perceived through our senses. So those imprints will ripen according to how they are generated, a kind of imprint they are. We can look at the teachings on karma to further understand what imprints do what and what's the quality of the imprints and all. There's many factors involved, but primarily it's a strength of it's the imprint it can be the actual action has influence, but also the intention is very big part of what determines a karmic imprint and how it will result. So in that case, we have some control over the result. And the result could be, if we don't motivate at all, the result might be just being maybe a really good student in our next life or something like that. Something mundane. So the way is our goal is to attain full awakening. Our goal is to attain full freedom. And that does not happen without a cause. It's not random. So we have to generate the causes, and the causes will ripen. And these causes are since they're more powerful, the more powerful your intention, the more powerful the cause or the potency, then the closer they will to ripening sooner. So motivate that we'll spend this time together. Maybe our whole lives we can motivate, but at least for this hour and a half, that we generate the intention of attaining a full awakening, so that we can also, not just for ourselves, but to bring peace to the world and into people's hearts and all living beings' hearts. And we can't do that without wisdom. We can't do that without compassion. So let's try. Okay. Okay. Okay, so how did you do with the little homework assignment? So you're gonna have to unmute if you want to say something. I had asked people to try and get a real sense of when we finished last week. It was with the understanding, with the presentation of just the touching upon ignorance, right? And which is our main object of meditation on the Buddhist path. When I say object, it's the main object of meditation. Actually, the main object of practice on the Buddhist path is the development of wisdom and the nature and understanding the nature of reality, because the main foe or obstacle or hindrance or whatever you want to call it that keeps us in a state of unawakening is ignorance. So it's kind of like two sides of a coin or something. Ignorance on one side and wisdom on the other. So it's very, 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 very important that when we, a lot of us are very drawn to the teachings on wisdom. Probably all of us are drawn to the teaching, but the teachings on wisdom don't really have the same depth, the same impact, if we don't understand in the same level the understanding of ignorance. So just like we talked about renunciation and understanding suffering, renunciation doesn't happen if we don't have a feeling or a sense of suffering. And these are difficult, not very familiar topics to our modern audience, right? Talking about suffering. I went to the dentist today and I was all ready to suffer for the filling she was going to do. It. She was so good, I didn't feel anything. So it was a little disappointing. I was all ready to be really a good practitioner with the drilling in my mouth, and she didn't test me. I think she was too good of a dentist or something. So without having appreciation for what our situation is, and that the situation, if anyone has a better word than suffering, then I'm always open to it. Struggle, problem. Sometimes I think problem is a good one. I think we're problem saturated. In other words, we go from one problem to the next problem. They don't seem to end. Even when we think we've solved it, it comes back. Okay. So I'm not going to bore you with the renunciation topic too much again, unless we fall back into that. So we're talking about what ignorance gets us to do, and we're going to go more into it. Did anyone get a feeling when I asked, just from the point of view that we see things as permanent, which is not the deepest, it's not the deepest by any means manifestation of ignorance, but it is a manifestation of ignorance, isn't it? Because if we look around us, you know, our experience. So, well, let's go back a little bit. So, does anybody have a sense, is there what is in your experience of the world and life in your day, in all your myriad experiences, is there anything in that is permanent? Any object or any experience or any feeling or thoughts, anything that's permanent?
Well, just our consciousness, our mind, right?
Okay. So our consciousness, our mind is permanent, right?
As permanent gets.
Okay, what is that? You don't mind if I don't want to say debate, you know, don't take it as argument, okay? It's if I push you a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Okay, because you're brave enough to say something.
Yes.
So for us to have this discussion, of course, we then need to define our terms, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not fair. So permanent in the way I'm using it, which is defined in Buddhist philosophy, permanent and impermanent, impermanent being the opposite of permanent. Permanent means that which does not change. Okay, it doesn't mean eternal. So typically in our modern culture, when we say something is permanent, we mean eternal.
I see.
So we might say, even though this earth is not technically eternal, it lasts a long time. So just for the sake of a discussion, we'll say the earth is eternal, right? But the earth is not permanent. You follow me? Because the earth is changing instant to instant, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So our term now is, our term permanent and impermanent. Permanent meaning not changing moment to moment. Impermanent meaning changing moment to moment. And then for something to be impermanent, again, I believe we should push our thinking, you know, not just use it for intellectual gymnastics, but I do really believe that we should push our thinking and our analytical minds. So I will push you a little bit. So impermanent, the definition, this is really weird for us if we don't think like this, I don't think. The definition of impermanent is not really that which changes moment to moment. The definition of impermanent is that which is produced. Okay, that adds a little flavor to it.
Okay.
Something that's produced, just to add a little more flavor, is something that has a cause, because produced and product is cause and effect, isn't it?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not produced. I mean, the cause is what produces it. So
yes. Yeah. And if it's produced, it has a cause.
Got it.
Okay, good. That's very, very, very powerful. So now I ask you again. So is there anything in our experience that's permanent?
No.
Hard to find, isn't it? Does anything?
It's impossible. Yeah.
Could you say numbers are permanent, like the number 2, the number 7?
They appear permanent, right? They appear to be permanent, but 2 is to produce. They still have a cause, don't they? There's a number, like if you're talking about 2 eggs, or are you talking just the number 2?
Just the number 2, the
number
quantity 2.
Okay, so the number 2, isn't it in part produced by your concept of it?
Yeah.
Can you have a number 2 without a concept of it?
No, I guess you can.
So now we found some other kinds of causes.
Yeah.
Oh no, you come back. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Well, I'm thinking the concept, I mean, I guess it's a concept that like two, that it's a quantity as opposed to a thing is still a thing.
So if you have
It's a
two
thing.
eggs, if you have
Yeah.
two eggs, are you talking about the eggs or the number two?
I'm still talking about the number two.
Okay, can the number two exist without the eggs?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I can think of the
Not-
number two right now and I don't have any eggs.
You can think of the number two, right?
Right.
Right. So you produced it in your mind, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there are things that are permanent. That's so I guess in that way it's impermanent. There are things that are permanent, by the way. And one of the ones, and I'm just going to drive you nuts right now. Is according to some schools, the concept, a mental image is permanent. So you could have the mental image of two, and they say that's permanent because it doesn't change moment to moment, right? So you would be correct in that if that's how you meant it, according to some schools of Buddhism. I'm not sure myself I believe that. I have some problems with that, but the other thing is that Tari mentioned mind being permanent. Mind is impermanent. Okay. Mind is impermanent. Doesn't your mind change moment to moment?
Yes, but how about that part of us that is with us when we die again, and then we bring that consciousness to our next lifetime?
Okay.
But
So
that keeps changing, I guess. Yeah. Okay, I get it.
yeah, and we're going to get into that more right now. If I get, I prepared hundreds of slides today.
Okay.
We'll maybe get through. We'll get the
On your
three.
mark, get set, go.
Go. But anyone else? So when you went through your week, were you able to capture this sense of permanence? That we see things permanently? Anyone try?
Yeah. Yeah. All the time.
Isn't that kind of, what do you think about that? So when you would look at, a lamppost, or what did you look at? Do you remember anything that came up to you in the week that particularly caught, you found yourself focusing on?
In my case, I realized that my attachments, I have the wish that it's permanent, but then I caught myself, in this sort of illusionary way of thinking that's not really permanent.
So what was it that you were actually seeing that appeared as permanent to you?
Well, the wish that a relationship I'm in will continue until my death.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's correct. So, and you could see that even though that's an impermanent phenomena, you see it as fixed, right?
Yeah, and I try to get the other person to like agree and promise me, oh yes, I'm never going to abandon you.
Well, that could be more eternal than permanent, but yes, it right now and everything. So it's beginning to get an appreciation for the fact that everything that we perceive, and we perceive things through the five senses. Okay, the ear, nose, eye, tactile, taste, smell, and we perceive things through, they call it mental sense. It's not actually a sense because it's not physical, but anyway, they call it mental sense. Everything is experienced through those. Well, let's take the five senses for a moment. So everything experienced through the five senses. Every object. This is really gets pretty interesting. There's no object that they perceive that's permanent. And yet everything they perceive, they think is permanent. Right? So this has to do with the fact that our minds are not very controlled. That's why we don't see things as they are. As the mind becomes more controlled, and this is not just in Buddhist tradition, but any meditative tradition, we will begin to see things, even perceive impermanence, because that's the way things are. and if you have a friend or someone who has that experience, then what happens is, well, I shouldn't say a friend. What happens often, and here's my critical mind coming out. So what happens is people, particularly in the West, have a little bit of experience, a little taste of this kind of insight. But there's many hundreds and hundreds of kinds of insights like this. So someone, like I mentioned last week, I don't know if it's, I'm teaching a couple classes right now, but that I had a friend write to me about his experience. And it's something happened in his meditation. He thinks it's like, I mean, I can't judge, I can't say, that it's like, not enlightenment, but like insight and emptiness or something. And I just get very cautious and very, to be very beware, because he hasn't studied much. And so you can mistake these experiences as more profound than they really are. So when we develop begin to develop the control of the mind, right? That's through meditation. And we are going to have experiences that are very profound. And the trick or the challenge, when we have this profound experience, we're going to do the same thing we do with everything. We're going to grab onto it as something fixed and permanent when it's not. So the practice is very tough. You got to constantly be letting go. There's no clinging even to profound experiences. Okay. And that's the bad news in a way. But if we cling, it actually acts as a speed bump in progressing to the next one, right? So the mind moves from gross to subtle to more subtle to more subtle, more subtle. And the level of subtlety, goes all the way up to enlightenment. And people have some experiences slightly more subtle than their gross mind, and they think they've attained enlightenment or some high realization. Yeah, and it's we have to be careful. Okay, I'm not trying to say that's bad. It's just you can't cling, because you won't get the next one, which is even more subtle. Okay. Okay, so I'm not sure where we left off last week. Does anybody remember where we left off? I have two different presentations. Well, did we get to this? Did we start wisdom? Anybody remember? Talked about the 3 higher trainings, right? Did we or did we not? Can't see everybody. That's the thing when I screen share. Is anybody saying yes or no?
I don't have my notes from last week, but that first slide does not look familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we just got through the deck from the first 2 sessions. And
yeah,
but
so this
I
is
could be wrong.
No, I think you're right. I'm trying to so this is the second presentation that's for today. And I just wanted to see. Is this showing up on your screen now? Yeah,
Yes.
right?
Yes, 3 higher trainings.
Yeah. The 4 effects of, oh, I see. Okay. Okay, we'll start here anyway. I'll forget where we left off. I mean, I know where we left off. I don't want to start getting all fiddly. So the class we're talking about here, right? We're talking about renunciation, emptiness, and pure perception. Pure perception, I'm going to kind of deal with through dealing with this idea of wisdom today, okay? There's a lot to talk about here. I mean, way too much prepared than we can actually get onto. I really want to make sure also I cover some content, but I also want to make sure that you have a chance to clarify in your mind. So when we, so the higher training in wisdom is what we're really talking about when we're talking about the train, when we're talking about emptiness, okay? So the higher training in wisdom, I've mentioned before, like a bird, most people, unfortunately, it seems there's a bias amongst us to dwell on, be overly focused on compassion. I think it has to do with, number one, compassion seems so tangible. Wisdom seems so ephemeral. And so it's not meant to be that way. And also, I think compassion is familiar to us based upon our Judeo-Christian upbringing. So, but the whole thrust of Buddhist practice is to have this very high level of compassion. So it's very committed to compassion. But the funny thing is that this level of compassion, this great compassion, they refer to it as this altruistic mind of enlightenment, which is compassionate mind of the awakening mind, cannot be actualized or developed, cannot be developed without understanding and realizing the nature of reality, which is the wisdom side. So one cannot avoid focusing and developing understanding of wisdom. You just can't, if your goal is to attain awakening, okay? Or even if your goal is to generate great compassion. Lower compassion, conventional compassion, you don't need wisdom, you could say, although it still would nurture even conventional compassion. But to attain awakening, so when we're doing a class at Shantideva Center, in a sense, what we're saying is, okay, we're doing this class at a Buddhist center. We're gonna accept that our values, our principles are going to be based in Buddhist principles. And the Buddhist principle, what separates it from everything else, is the principle of awakening, okay, of enlightenment. Okay. Now, there are other things. According to Shakyamuni Buddha, he was the one in our era that attained enlightenment and then passed that on. So before him, there were no other practitioners that attained enlightenment. They attained high states of consciousness, but not actual enlightenment. Of course, if you want to get really technical about it, Shakyamuni Buddha was the fourth Buddha on this planet, but the previous one, Kashyapa, was millions and millions and millions of years before him. So we're saying in our era, the Shakyamuni Buddha was up to that time the only one who attained enlightenment. Since that time, countless or thousands or millions, I don't know how many, have attained enlightenment through the practicing of these teachings. None of them attained enlightenment through the practice of any other religion or path. They all attained it through the practice of the Buddhist principles. So central to the Buddhist principle, oops, I didn't expand this, right. Central to the Buddhist principle is the balance of method and wisdom, or compassion and wisdom, okay? So we're all okay? So in terms of wisdom, we talk about emptiness. So, and I have here, forget about emptiness. The reason I say that is that we always hear over and over, selflessness, emptiness, emptiness, selflessness, egolessness, selflessness, emptiness, 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 right? Sheila, is that right? Yeah. So I remember Lama Zoben saying to us a long time ago, he said, you need to stop saying that. Of course, I don't know if we completely need to, because Rinpoche said, when you say emptiness, you're meeting what it communicates is a voidness, void, not a void, voidness, nothingness. Okay, nothingness, right? It can convey the thought, and emptiness is not nothingness. So emptiness, to say it's nothingness, is a violation of the middle way. So in the middle way, to understand emptiness, we couldn't understand nothingness, because that's the extreme of annihilation. And a middle way avoids the two extremes of annihilation and what's the other word? Annihilation and eternalism. Okay. Generally speaking, when I asked you to look at what your weekly, look at your perceptions this past week, what I was suggesting that we see things in the extreme of eternalism. And that has many factors to it, many variables. I'm giving sort of the emptiness 101 teaching, aren't I? The wisdom 101. This is very, very, very brief. You know, I'm trying to do it justice. But you know, we spend years and years and years and years studying this topic. Okay. I mean, and this is just showing my own inadequacy. At 45 years, I still study it. I still read a different new text or the same text over and again, commentaries over again. Yeah, this is not something that one stops studying or researching, I should say, until a very, very high level, actually, of realization. Okay. Even after one realizes directly a perception of emptiness, one still studies, because you can still have, you're refining your perception of emptiness to a more and more subtle perception. Okay, so the correct way of talking about emptiness, if we want to be completely correct, is we need to say emptiness of something. Okay, it's not emptiness. Emptiness is not a thing. Okay, you can't perceive emptiness. If you do, you're perceiving nothingness, which you can perceive nothingness. Actually, it is an object of perception. That, and so meditators, this is why it's so important to study. So I'm really glad to get impressed upon you my biases, because one of the biases is what's happening right now in, I'm going to go off the screen share for a second, because this point is very important. What's happening right now, I'm going to be kind of pedantic about this, but what's happening right now is we have a large interest in Buddhist philosophy and psychology and meditation, don't we? Particularly in the last, what do you think, 20 years? I'm not saying when it started, but it started exploding. What do you think? 10 years? 15? 20? Anyone want to say?
I'd say in the last 20.
Right. Okay. So in the last 20 years, there's this explosion. The teachings became more and more available. There's more and more translations of these teachings from the four traditions out of Tibet, as well as through the Theravada tradition. So it's this kind of, with the internet as well, everything has been exploding. Everything's available. Everything's, you know, the content. You look at just since the pandemic, the number of teachings available on Zoom, phenomenal, right? So, so what happens is, unfortunately, I mean, it's really, actually, it's a hard thing to talk about. But what happens is that people dive in. When we get involved in a spiritual path, we don't really change that much. We just shift our bias. So if we were alcoholics before, and then we become sort of Dharma alcoholics, you know, it's bringing the same mindset. Or if we really, like, I have friends, someone in particular who's very materialistic, he was always very concerned about belonging, you know, in that group or this group or being recognized. And he became Buddhist, which is great. But then it was sort of the same thing. He kind of was trying to latch on to who were the most popular people, well-known, renowned. And that's what he did before in other environments. And then go to his house. He has a beautiful, beautiful meditation room with all these statues, and the best statues and the best tankas and the and the best meditation seat and the best, you know what I mean? We don't change that quickly. Don't trust what people do. Just because they throw away all their clothes and sell their car, it doesn't mean anything. Okay. That's not, it happens slowly, right? If you do it quick, then you're quick to leave, right? Do it quick, and then when next year they say, it didn't really work for me so well. Now I'm a Sufi, or now I'm gone into business, I'm getting my MBA or whatever. That's what happens, right? Am I being too critical? Anyway, that's what I think happens. So it's a slow process, and slow is better. Slow is better. So what's happened is there's a lot of meditation traditions coming out, right? All kinds of mindfulness meditations and meditations on Mahamudra and Dzogchen and and they're all, it's not from the side of the teaching there's a problem. It's from the side of the student or the teacher. And what happens is people are meditating these profound meditations on emptiness, Dzogchen, Mahamudra, whatever, clarity of mind, whatever. And what's happening is, because they haven't studied enough, they're meditating on nothingness. Or they're meditating on blankness. Emptiness is not that. Okay, it's actually quite dynamic. Okay, and when we are over, when our focus, it's nothing wrong with having the experience of nothingness, or nothing wrong with having the experience of space, right? And then you go, oh, this is space. That's important. What is lost because not enough guidance is people meditating on space and thinking they're meditating on emptiness, and then they get locked on that, and they spend years on that. And the actual result of that is not a positive result. That's what's funny and ironic. Okay, the actual result. Well, if you take a tradition, I'm going to be sort of religious here. So I was listening to teaching by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and he was talking about this thing. This is a year or two ago, and I listened to it 2 or 3 times. I really want to make sure I heard him when he said the karmic result of that meditation for most is to be reborn in the animal realm. And I thought, oh my God. It's like, wow. Now, I don't know, if it's literal or not. He says possible you could get born in the God realm, because there's God realm. It's not for the purpose of this class, but when we study the stages of meditation, that one goes through, then of course one goes through the absorptions of the God realm absorptions, and one of the absorptions in the formless God is the absorption into nothingness, meditating on nothingness. So it could be that. But I think for most people, because there's a strong attachment involved and a sleeping, what happens when we meditate on space, and I could see this from this letter this friend of mine wrote to me, is there's actually a what's called subtle dullness, and you don't recognize it. And that subtle dullness is an obscuration, which if it were to lead to, if it ripens, it can ripen into ignorance, like an ignorance of an animal, so to speak. So whether it's metaphorical, literal, I think it's both. Okay. So very important to know what we're doing. Does that make sense? Am I being too religious? Am I being too strong? So ignorance is so when we talk about emptiness, let's turn that around and talk about what the opposite of emptiness, of inherent, So when we say emptiness, we should be saying emptiness of something. So you typically, to start, well, the best word probably, or best, there's a couple, 2 or 3 good words, but empty of inherent existence. So whenever someone says emptiness, finish the sentence in your head. Emptiness of inherent existence, that's one. Empty of independent existence, that's a good one. Empty of natural existence. Empty of existing on its own. Okay, something like that. Then of course, those are unusual terms. Inherent existence is still hard to understand for me. But so you take your time to study those terms and those words, and then you meditate on, you try and see. So when I asked you last week to go through your week, I wanted you to see if you could recognize that we see things inherently. Now, I didn't say inherently, I said permanently. Permanent existence and inherent existence are not synonyms. But to recognize permanence is a really good doorway to understanding inherent existence. Okay. And there's a few more steps one can take before actually then focusing on inherent existence. So ignorance compels, ignorance compels us to see things as unchanging when they are not. Okay. Ignorance compels us to see things as inherently existent when they're merely described. That's a pretty intense statement. And ignorance compels us to see the world as satisfying when it's not. So I believe I mentioned about the Four Noble Truths, and really the Four Noble Truths are the four truths for a noble being. A noble being is someone who's recognized the emptiness of inherent existence, perceived it directly. You can also perceive emptiness. Initially, we perceive emptiness with conceptually. We work with it conceptually, like a mental image of it. And then slowly you meditate, your meditation gets better and better. And your object of meditation, which is emptiness of inherent existence, gets better and better. So eventually the conceptual interaction, with emptiness transforms slowly into a non-conceptual direct experience of emptiness. You see it exactly as it is, okay? Without a mental image or concept. So for that being who has that perception is called a noble being or an Arya being. And so they're the four truths for a noble being. So the noble being will automatically at that point, when you realize direct insight into emptiness, you will always see the world as dissatisfying. And until that time, we will always see the world as satisfying. Now, the good news is the more we meditate, and even conceptually, our seeing the world as satisfying becomes reduced. Okay? So it is a path. It's not like all or nothing. Your mind progresses. It develops. That's the beauty. That's what's called the path. So to progress along the path doesn't just need to have realized emptiness directly, non-conceptually, but they do to be realizing emptiness conceptually is the beginning of the path. So in a sense, we could say one hasn't entered the path until one is able to meditate on emptiness of inherent existence conceptually. Okay, and yeah, and in the Mahayana path, you will have had to generate bodhicitta, the awakening mind, even if it's still conceptual, but there's a transformation that happens in the mind when the bodhicitta becomes awakened within our mind stream, right? Versus a non-awakened mind, non-awakened bodhicitta. It might be just very, and it is very infantile, maybe for thousands of years, maybe even, but it has been activated. Now it can be activated, and for Shakyamuni Buddha, from the moment his bodhicitta became activated, it was one countless eon, which I think we talked about the years. It's an unfathomable amount of years before he had the direct experience of emptiness. So he had generated bodhicitta, he had a conceptual understanding of emptiness, and yet he didn't have a direct perception of emptiness for one countless great eon. Then when he had that direct perception of emptiness, he had, that's when you enter the first bodhisattva of the 10 bodhisattva paths or levels. So at that point, one enters the first bodhisattva level. You're guaranteed enlightenment. There's no argument there. And you never ever can fall back into samsara, but you're not enlightened. Okay, because there's this process of through his or through one's meditation on the non-conceptual direct perception of emptiness, that's what purifies the mind. So when the mind has been obscured through countless eons of habit, one bare insight into emptiness doesn't purify all that. You have to continue meditating on the direct perception of emptiness and inherent existence, and it gets purified. So in terms of the Mahayana Sutra practice, that process can take 3 great eons. Now, this is later in my, probably won't get to it, so I'll just say it now. In the presentation, so that's the Mahayana Sutra path, we call it Sutrayana. There's another Mahayana path called the Vajrayana, the Tantra. So in the Vajrayana, it exaggerates. It exaggerates the realization of emptiness. It throws, how to say this? It activates it. It throws, through certain tantric practice, through these practices, the insight into emptiness grows exponentially. And one can and has attained enlightenment in one lifetime. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. Milarepa attained enlightenment in one single lifetime. But you cannot attain enlightenment in a single lifetime through the Sutrayana path. And when we say that Shakyamuni Buddha took 3 countless eons, it's because it's the description of him as the Sutrayana Buddha or practitioner. Some would say he also attained it much quicker because he was a tantric practitioner as well in some previous lives. Okay. So ignorance is our thing. Okay, so we see things as existing inherently. And down below or independently on their own are pretty close to each other, those two. The one permanently I have in there just to remind us, we see many things incorrectly. We see things as permanent. We see things as satisfying. We see things as unitary, as one thing. We see things as unitary, as existing singly, right? Those are all concepts and that we need in understanding that things don't exist inherently. We also have 4 philosophical schools. We also have 4 philosophical schools that Buddha taught. So Buddha taught reality is this, which means like emptiness, or reality is this. And so those concepts or those ideas that the Buddha taught, reality is this and ignorance is this, were more fundamental. That's because they were easier to understand for certain students. So for a little bit more intelligent students or disciples, he said, well, what I taught there is true, but actually there is a more subtle understanding. And the more subtle understanding of reality is this. When we say reality, we're talking about how the self, the person exists, and how objects exist. Okay, just so we're clear. There's only those 2 things. So then other practitioners are more subtle, more intelligent, maybe more advanced. He said, well, actually, those 2 other ideas, those 2 concepts I taught there's actually a more subtle one. Okay, for them. And so a philosophical school formed around all 3 of those. And then there's a fourth, which is considered the highest philosophical school, which sometimes we hear the name Madhyamika, and in the Madhyamika, it's divided into 2. These are really fascinating for those who are interested. For other people could care less probably, but I find them unbelievably fascinating. So then there's many texts that you study, read thoroughly, which compares the different points of view of these 4 schools. And these 4 schools are, schools might be, I think it's not quite the right name. I would say sort of trends. There are schools in Buddhism that align themselves with each of these trends. But I think from the point of view in Tibetan Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhist, the four traditions adhere to the Madhyamika, the highest school of explanation of reality. But when we look at other traditions of Buddhism, they don't. They're not adhering to what's considered the highest final description of reality. Okay. And the reason these exist is for the practitioner, because not everyone can just understand or focus on the highest view of reality. And by the way, even if you're adherent to the highest view, explanation of the view, which is the Prasangika Madhyamika, even if you're that person, you in your development of your insight into emptiness of inherent existence, you'll go through the lower schools first, just naturally, your mind, not intellectually. as you meditate on emptiness, your first experiences are going to be those as they're described in the lower schools. So it's progressive. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. Doesn't have to be that way, but probably for most people, it works kind of like that. Even if you're at, maybe, you stay at the lower school's view, start off with that. Maybe you're there only a day or two, who knows, but your mind will progress through these 4 levels or these 4 understandings of reality. Okay. Okay. So as Geshe Gelek said, I often quote Geshe Gelek, one of my teachers, we see what isn't there and we don't see what is there. Okay. That's a very, very helpful way to begin to understand this vast topic of reality. So when you went through your week last week, what you saw is there, I'm going to just generalize. What you saw was there wasn't there. So you saw permanence, for example. There was no permanence in anything you perceived with your 5 senses. Yet that's all we see. Okay. What we don't see, we don't see what is there. There's a lot of things that are there that we don't see. Impermanence, things made up of parts, things that are dependent on each other, things that are dependent on causes to arise. We don't notice they arise. By the way, that's not a real waterfall, right? That's just a sidewalk art painting. Okay, it's just 2-dimensional, right? That's what happens to us. We think everything is 3-dimensional. I mean literally, because they are 3-dimensional, but we see things existing in ways that they don't exist. They're beyond logic that they would exist that way. Does anybody need a break? Sheila, no? Okay, have your, okay. Okay. I had already covered this, okay? Okay. So what we see that isn't there is we see things existing the way they appear. What we see that isn't there is that they're truly existing. What we see that isn't there is we see inherent existence. What we see that isn't there is things existing independently on their own. Again, it's not out of the scope of this class to go out, but these terms, these ideas are exhaustively explained. Okay, exhaustively, each one of these ideas is explained over hundreds of pages or tens of pages, whatever you want to say, volumes of books. Okay. I'm trying to remember, because you see, Buddha himself taught, I'm trying to remember how many. Remember the number of scriptures that Buddha taught, 100, 108 full scriptures. But you have things like the perfection, like the different scriptures he taught based on wisdom, this idea of emptiness. And we know the one most common is the shortest one, was the Heart Sutra. And then there's the sutra he taught, 8,000 verses, 100,000 verses. I can't remember, 20,000. So I think there's 4 different primary scriptures that he taught. I mean, they became scriptures after he taught them. I think 100,000 stanzas, 20,000, 8,000, and then the Heart Sutra, which I don't know how many stanzas that is. Not that many. Okay, so those, so you can go and study all those. And then that's not to mention all the commentaries to those by all the great masters over the millennium, right? Over 2,500 years. So wisdom is generating a correct view of reality, seeing things existing non-inherently and seeing things existing independence, not independent, independence. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here. Hang on, everyone. There's a lot of stuff, right? Okay. I have to take a breather. Anybody want to say something so I don't have to talk?
Yeah, I can make a comment.
Thank you.
These four systems, they're called tenet systems.
Correct.
And they're by Bhashikas, the Sautantrikas, the Chittamatra or Yogacara, and the Majjhimika, which is divided into Savatantrika and Prasangika.
Thank you.
And they were given by the Buddha, the three turnings of the wheels addressed to these different people with different interests. Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
what I wanted to just add a bit.
Thank you. No, it helps. It helps because I probably wasn't clear. Yeah, and when we look through the Buddhist world today, countries like Sri Lanka and Thailand, hang on, Burma, would follow the Vaibhashika school, probably Sautantrika maybe. We look at, because those are quote unquote the Hinayana countries, or the fundamental school, fundamental vehicle, usually referred to as the Hinayana, but so the fundamental vehicles captured and primarily practiced in places like Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka. Then you have the Mahayana countries, and I'm just talking very generally. Mahayana practicing countries such as China and Japan and Korea, Nepal and Tibet, places like that. And so those countries, the practitioners are going to be following either the Chittamatran, as Alejandro said, that the Chittamatran and the Madhyamika school, presentation of reality. Okay. Now it's also possible that one could be really call oneself a fundamentalist or a Hinayana or Mahayana practitioner, one of the two, but actually hold the view of another school. That's not uncommon. Sometimes you read texts from Tibet, which is it's a Prasangika highest school, but a lot of the lamas might have been teaching from Chittamatran approach to emptiness, because they felt that's what their students could accommodate. Okay, or maybe was their level of realization. When we look at the Zen tradition, for example, in the Zen tradition, it tends to fall within the Chittamatran school or the Yogacara school, the mind-only school, which is the third highest of the four schools. Anything else? Are you still with me? You exhausted yet? Yes, Margaret.
Hi, I just had a thought, you were mentioning before that what we perceive through our five senses.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then, we have intuition too.
That's right.
Okay, so I was just thinking, with all the animals in the world
Mhm.
and even insects, let's say,
Mhm.
I don't think we or scientists probably know enough to know what they can perceive that we don't perceive.
For sure.
It's just a very interesting thought to me, because it's like, we think we're so great and all that, right?
Yeah.
But animals, insects, they're gifted in ways that we're not.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't have no clue what a cockroach is perceiving, but it manages to live through nuclear wars. I know we usually think of dolphins and cats, but I wanted to throw the cockroach, the poor lowly cockroach in there.
Yeah.
But I will say something. So let me ask you, Margaret. So what's the difference between human beings and animals?
That's a good question. Animals are probably kinder, innately, probably more loyal, things like that. Let's see. The difference. I don't know. I'm just so in tune with animals and their gifts and intelligence. And, it's really hard to say, well, we have more of this, because on some levels, I don't think we really know. But, I know you're looking for an answer that exists, and I'm trying to come up with it. So maybe you could help me.
Anybody else have an idea? Yeah. Lynn?
I'm thinking that perhaps, maybe there's an example, but I can't think of one, that animals don't create their own suffering the way we do.
Okay. What would that mean would be a difference? Why don't they? I'm not disputing it. I'm just
Yeah,
seeking-
no, I don't know what to call it, other than the monkey mind,
Mhm.
maybe they just don't have that horrific trait that we do.
Anybody else?
Maybe they do, we don't know.
When you say they don't create the same suffering that we do, what did you mean by that? Suffering?
Well, I think everything that we've been talking about, our grasping onto, I'm thinking about my dog, and he definitely is attached to his feedings and knows when he hasn't had one, and so maybe my theory is wrong, but
No, I'm not sure yet. We're going to find out.
yeah, no, I wish I could articulate it a little
And
better, but
let me ask you this, Margaret, to everybody. Let's forget about our dogs for a moment, okay? Because aren't they sort of the pinnacle of the animal realm? Remember I said, oh gosh, I forgot the number, 7 quintillion mosquitoes on the planet, right? How many pet dogs are there? There's like, it's pretty insubstantial, right? Compared to all those mosquitoes. So in the animal realm, we have the mosquitoes, we have the ants, we have the cockroaches, we have the birds, we have the slugs, we have the worms, we have the fish, and it's just countless, right? So of all those animals, our pet dogs are kind of it's statistically uncountable, isn't it? Really. So I'm not going to let you talk about your dog or your cat right now. Well, you can if you want. So would any of you want to wake up tomorrow morning and be your dog? See, I broke my own rule there, by the way. Would any of you want to wake up tomorrow morning and be your dog or your cat?
No.
Why? Lynn, I'm going to pick on you now. You'll never say anything again, I'm sure. But no, you think about
Oh.
this kind of answers your question. If you really become reflective for a moment. I remember the Lamas, when I first heard this, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was in some teaching, and he was talking about, it was like Kafka's, what is it? Wakes up as a cockroach, what is it?
Metamorphosis.
Metamorphosis, is it? Metamorphosis?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we won't even go there, but he was talking about, okay, imagine you wake up tomorrow morning and you're covered in hair. And you have whiskers, and your hands now are like claws. Right? And you're running around for that, and you got this fur that's quite warm, and you can't communicate with them. You're trying to tell, and I know, I think Jessica's heard me say many times, the scariest movie I ever saw, serious, when I was a kid, was The Shaggy Dog. Anyone ever see that movie? The Walt Disney movie. Because I thought it could happen. And he's driving around, and he's growing this into his dog. So would any of you, so no one, I don't think anyone, I mean, maybe people say it sort of in a romantic way, but I don't think there's anyone. Now, that's our dogs who are really privileged, our cats and dogs, very, very privileged. So it's not even fair. So what about as a mosquito? And we don't even opt to grow, wake up tomorrow morning and be our dog or our cat. You know, and then no one understands us. Even if you knew you were who you were, you know, the previous night, you couldn't tell anybody. You'd never be able to communicate it. And even, you know, okay, I'll write it, but you don't have the capacity even to write down, hey, I'm Lynn, here I am. You know, how terrifying. It's terrifying. Why is it terrifying? To me anyway. That's because that's what we mean by suffering. See? So the difference between human and animal, for me, well, I think it's true, is one thing that's the difference is, yes, we're in the nature of suffering together, and maybe animals have a different, some ways they suffer less, you know, in certain ways. I understand that. Certainly emotionally, right? Psychologically, they probably do. But the fact, what's the difference is, when you leave your home, when you go to work, can you tell your dog, you're going to put all this food in his bowl, but only eat half of it now and half tonight because you're going to be home late? Can you tell that? No. Or, you know, there's the extras in the cupboard, just go in and get that when you want it. You can't. Or I'm going to be home in a couple hours, so you don't have to cry and whine and bark, you know, and howl. Doesn't do it. It doesn't. So the difference between it has to do with our capacity. So it has to do with our quote unquote intelligence. So we do have, it's like people say, oh, do you have free will? Well, it is kind of related to that. We have potential. I mean, the animals have Buddha potential too, by the way. Animals, spirits, everything has Buddha potential, but they don't have very much, it seems, they don't have the equipment to use it. And then I think there's some things missing from their intelligence, from their brains, from their minds. Okay. That's why the human rebirth. Now, you think about humans. So as you know, we talk about this precious human rebirth. So it's not very precious. It's precious in potential. It's precious in potential. But for most of us, we don't use the preciousness of it. We're not that different than animals. We're just looking for pleasure, 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 avoiding pain, pain, pain. It's not that different than animals, really. It's just more sophisticated. That doesn't make it better, does it? So we think we're so much better because we can watch TV and the animals can't. They don't even know how to turn it on. That shows our potential, our intelligence, but it doesn't show we're using it. because the experience of watching television is probably not that different than the experience of our cat watching the birds flying around outside. Okay. At that time when we're watching, is our intelligence, our potential any more active than theirs? It doesn't seem to be, does it? Unless we start reflecting, right? Start reflecting and analyzing, and then there's probably a fundamental difference. I don't think that animals analyze, and we can't say because I can't go in their brains, but it seems they don't analyze and don't have discriminating thought and conceptual thought like that, So that's a pretty big difference.
Then we use our potential to create wars and pollution and lots of very dangerous and detrimental things. I mean, our
I think we have-
intelligence.
Yeah, I think we have the potential to make a lot more heavier karma than many animals. And remember in our first class, we talked about suffering as something different than, feeling bad. It's about creating causes. So that lead to future suffering. That's really the definition of suffering. Suffering is not about what we feel right now, not really. And we can't get this out of our head that, oh, I'm really suffering because I have COVID. That's how we talk, right? Or they're really suffering in Ukraine. It doesn't mean they're not, by the way, don't get me wrong. But that's not we don't call that the definition of suffering. The fact that they're in terror in Ukraine being bombed, that is suffering, but that's not the definition. Because if that were the definition, then the people not in Ukraine would not be suffering. And according to Buddhist psychology, everyone is suffering intensely. So what it means is if you're, it's not a bad analogy. If every day you drink a little bit of antifreeze because you like the taste of it, and you saw that person, wouldn't you say that person's suffering? Of course you would, even though right now they're not sick, right? I mean, maybe you wouldn't use the word suffering, but you would say, wow, that is really stupid, and I'm so worried about them in the future. They're slowly killing themselves or smoking cigarettes or something, right? So that's how we're talking about suffering, not this idea of what I feel right now. Yes, that when we talk about how I feel right now, you remember that there are three different levels of suffering. Did we talk about that? Did I talk about that in this class? That there's a suffering of suffering. These are technical terms: suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and pervasive suffering. So when we talk about being in Ukraine and getting bombed and the terror that you experience, that's only the first level of suffering. That's referred to suffering of pain or the suffering of suffering. That's where we focus on. From the point of view of how things actually are, that's the most grossest form of suffering. So the second level is the suffering of change. And what that means is everything is in the nature of change, but we don't know it. We don't see it. And we don't act that way. Okay. Even just this life, how much time do we spend really embracing the suffering of change, which means everyone you see and know, everyone, your kids, your friends, your parents, everybody is going to die right in front of you, right? You have to say goodbye to every one of them, or you're going to die. Either way, you have to say goodbye to everybody. That's not suffering. That's suffering of change. Suffering change also is the thing that things are constant in nature, change. And so we say things like, well, now I'm finally settled. I finally put away enough money in my 401k. Now I'll just be content the rest of my life. It doesn't work that way, does it? The stock market goes down, your 401k's value goes down. How home prices go up in your neighborhood, or now your neighborhood changes. It's more polluted, or it's more violent, right? That's the suffering of change. We don't have control over that. Or you finally retire, you got your 401k, you're doing okay, your home is okay, and all of a sudden you come home, all of a sudden you find out you know, you have cancer. So now you have the fear. What happens next? It's unrelenting. I'm not just, you're probably happy this is your last class with me. That's such a negative guy. But it's not negative. It is negative because things are negative. You might say, oh, why are you focusing on that, Karuna? Well, there's no reason to focus on that if you don't do something about it, and you can't do something about it. Then, like, I didn't tell my mom this stuff. She didn't have the capacity to do anything about it. No way. You don't tell little kids this stuff. You know, you can educate them so that you can prepare them for this. But, you know, it's not useful if you can't do anything about it, right? And so you be very kind to people who can't do anything about it. You can't just treat them with kindness and warmth and affection. You know, it's sad, you know, and then inside you're sad, right? Inside you're sad. Inside you're sad because a suffering of change, not pervasive suffering, the most intense one is when we're able to perceive, get an appreciation for what I was talking about earlier, ignorance. When you really start to see it. What does ignorance do, right? That's pervasive suffering. And I'm going to jump, I got a slide for you. If I can find it, if you will. Trust me. Oopsie. I didn't mean to do that. The source of all problems is ignorance. That is a deluded mind that is incorrect in respect to its cognition of phenomena or perception of phenomena. It cognizes this phenomena in a mistaken manner. So therefore, without talking about nirvana, to eliminate suffering, you need a mind that recognizes ultimately the nature of phenomena. Okay? That's a very, very unusual way of thinking about it. Okay? So when we, sorry. When we, I want to just try to find this one slide. I have no idea where it is. Oh, I see. Oh, well, it's too many, huh? This I got ready all for you guys. That's okay. 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 So what I was trying to look for is this progression of what our situation is. And so I didn't find it, so I'll extrapolate. When it causes mental disorders, so all the problems that would arise for us, depression, anxiety, fear, apprehension, lack of confidence, doubt, hesitation, anger, jealousy, envy, they all arise from incorrect view or a misperception of one's own identity. I am this. Okay. And how the identity of objects exists. Okay. So by the end of this class, which is soon, what I'm hoping to impart, so very, very simply, we never hear this in any psychological theory in particular, and even in much of our study, spiritual study. We do hear about this idea of selflessness, and we don't really know maybe why it's important. This is why it's important. So all of us have a sense of who I am, right? If I say to you, hey, Sheila, or hey, Lynn, or hey, Margaret, so on, the other people don't think, oh, he's calling my name out. But the person I say name to says, oh, he's speaking to me, right? So just like, we have a sense of I, don't we? Of self. Just like if you feel for a minute, you're sitting there and I'm sitting here, you're not sitting where the other person is. You're sitting where you are. So there is someone there, isn't there? Okay. There is someone there. There is someone who is labeled Sheila or Karuna or Lynn, like that. But the whole idea that we're talking about is I am this. So I'm a doctor, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a truck driver, I'm angry, I'm hungry, I'm confused. I, right? All of those, then that I is never gone from your awareness, from your experience. It gets subtle and it gets gross. When it's coarse, it's like when you're really angry, someone just cut you off and it flares up. Okay, that's the coarse one. But it's also there when you're taking a walk in a nice environment, in good mood. It's there then too. It's less coarse and less problematic, you could say too. Then we talk about this. This is again something I want to impart before we are really done. So that sense of self, there is totally 100% misperceived. And because it's a total, not only is it misperceived, that idea of self that we have of ourselves, this is what gets weird. It doesn't even exist at all. That self, if you try to find it, doesn't exist. That's why it's called selflessness. Now, when you look at when you look at an object like when you look at a cup or a desk or something or a bed or whatever, car, that's the other. That's phenomena. And phenomena also has a self like that, not a living animate self. It's when we look at a cup, we see a self in it, not a personality, but something that exists from its own side. So when we say, I'm really hungry, or I'm really angry, that self that we're saying, I'm really angry, stands up very strong and appears to exist on its own, right? And then when we say, oh, that's a really nice cup over there, we do the same thing to the cup. We're giving it a nature that exists from its own side, aren't we? So when I say, I'm feeling really hungry, or I'm feeling, really sad, or I'm feeling really troubled, or I'm feeling confused, then that sense of self stands up as really strong and appearing to exist independently from its own side. It's something real, right? Or when we look at, something, an object, phenomena, Ukraine, or Trump, or whatever, another person, your child, then you do the same we do the same thing, that exists from its side very strongly as well, if we have a strong opinion about it. If we don't have a strong opinion, then we do see a self. So it's like that self of oneself and that self of an object don't exist the way they appear. That's a meditation on emptiness. That's the process that we deal with in attaining enlightenment. That's a process we deal with in becoming spiritually, actualizing our spiritual potential. Okay? This is very important. And we don't have enough time to get it. So what that self, we call that, is we're grasping at a real self, aren't we? And then when I look at the, really nice house that I wish I lived in, we're grasping at a self of others, of an other object. Like an identity. Maybe you don't want to call it a self, an identity. That cup you're looking at, that when you look at the cup, you're looking at it and an identity of the cup. We're actually not seeing the cup at all. Do you know that? When we say, oh, I'm really sad or I'm really angry, we're not seeing the I at all. It's a total fabrication that we've been hypnotized by for countless eons, forever. We've believed it since beginningless time. It's amazing that it's gone on this long. But now it won't go on forever because we're engaging in these ideas. It won't go on forever. And that's really worth jumping up and down about. Oh, it is what I was looking for. So this is what happens. First, determine how you think the I exists. So you think it exists solidly, inherently, from its own side, independently, like this thing, very concretely. Then get to really know this way of existing. Okay, so you really become more engaged with it. Yeah, you see more and more, like even when you're washing the dishes, it's showing up that way, right? Even when you're calling your friend, it's showing up that way. Even when you're whatever, being affectionate, is coming that way. Now, this is the meditation. So then the third thing you do is if it does exist the way it appears, it must be there somewhere, right? Right? It must be in there somewhere. So when you say, hey, I'm really disappointed in you, I'm really irritated, I'm really upset with, the politics of the situation, Roe versus Wade, or these shootings. I mean, it's hard not to be, but anyway, so these shootings, I'm really, we're not talking about whether the shooting is good or bad. I'm not talking about it. I'm talking about the I that shows up. So that I, that sense of self, it's got to be there somewhere, right? Right? We believe it. We believe it's there. And how we believe it, and this is where for another course, some other day, is how do we see it existing? Well, we see it existing very independently, very solidly, all that from its own side. More and more and more. There's different descriptions of what we do. And that, so when we meditate on emptiness, we're meditating on the empty. Now, how is that appearing from the Prasangika Madhyamika view? It's appearing as inherently true. There's something inherently there. It's got to be something there. I'll find it. It's unfindable. That's the process of meditating on emptiness. And what happens is when we engage in that process, there will be an experience where you will do that, and all of a sudden, there's no more thinking. You have a direct experience of that. No logic, no concept, no reasoning, no analysis. But until that time, logic, reasoning, analysis. Okay, that's the practice of insight meditation. But when you have but it's still not the direct experience. But when you do have the direct experience, all of a sudden that self that we've believed in since the beginning of this time is totally it's totally empty of existing the way we always thought it did. And that's over. Then you're done. From then on, you just cultivate that, whether that's for a year or two, or a lifetime or two, or an eon or two, doesn't matter. Okay, see you later.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed your teachings, and I hope Sheila invites you back real soon.
Okay, thank you.
You beat me to the punchline. Yes, thank you, Karuna. This is really just sort of the iceberg. So I hope you do come back and we continue.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Is, I mean, for me, I'm sure. I mean, I don't want to sound, what's the word, fake, but I benefit a lot. So I benefit a lot, of course, because I have to explain it, and then explaining it and trying to explain it in a way that is what's the word, is understandable. Then that means I have to understand it better, right? Well, remember I said, I think it was, I can't remember which class, but I think I said this one, that Einstein said, if you can't explain a complex idea simply, then you don't understand it well enough. So that's the demand. And I hope I didn't make any mistakes. I hope I didn't offend anybody. I was going to say to our friend, who was it last week, Sheila, that I think she's still not here, right? They talked about her experience doing Vajrasattva retreat at Milarepa Center.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure who that was either. I would have to go back and look at the roster and I don't.
The reason I brought it up is I wanted to apologize to her, because she was telling us that. And then I launched into this big, long story about going up into the mountains, and Lama Yeshe said this and that. And it was not very polite. It wasn't very sensitive, so I wanted to apologize to her for that. Okay. Any other quick questions, points? Okay. Thank you. And see, oh yeah, forgot this part. So first of all, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Sheila and Shantideva Center, for creating the conditions for us to share our time together. And then this is the most profound topic on the planet, for sure. And so we dedicate our merits, all the positive karma energy we generated, we're dedicating it towards those things we wish to attain, but especially the very high aims of the fully developing the awakening mind that leads us directly to full awakening, not just for ourselves, because that's kind of selfish, but for the benefit of really freeing all those around us. Because as we progress, we begin to feel and see the welfare of others as very tragic. And even now, we might see that it's very tragic, and then all of a sudden they die tomorrow, and we didn't have a chance to help them because of we have no clairvoyance, so we can't go into wherever they are and try and help again. So countless beings are dying right around us that we're not helping. So we should do it quickly, generate the mind of understanding reality and the bodhicitta mind of awakening, great compassion. So we don't forget them, and with wisdom, we have the means or the understanding of how to help them. Okay, so think for a minute like that. And if you have a spiritual guide or someone in your family who's not doing well, spiritual guide who's manifesting illness or difficulties, and also dedicate these merits for his or her well-being so they can continue their virtuous work, or church of family members or friends who may be struggling emotionally or physically. Okay, thank you again. Everybody have a good night.